I thought I was only stopping for 5 minutes to help a stranger at a gas station. I never imagined those 5 minutes would become a memory I could never forget. That was the moment everything changed, although I did not know it at the time. My name is Ethan Walker, and before that day my life was simple, predictable, and carefully organized. I worked as an automotive technician in a small town outside the city, and most of my days followed the same pattern. I would wake up early, drive the same roads, finish my work, and return home knowing exactly what tomorrow would look like. There was nothing wrong with my life, but I had become so comfortable with my routine that I rarely allowed anything unexpected to enter it. That afternoon, I stopped at a gas station about 20 minutes from my apartment. It was a quiet place I had visited many times before, usually just long enough to fill my tank and continue my drive home. The sky was beginning to change colors as the sun moved lower, and there were only a few people around. As I walked toward the entrance, I noticed a man standing near a parked car, looking at his phone and checking something under the hood. He did not seem panicked, just uncertain about what to do next. Most people probably would have walked past, and honestly, I almost did too. I had a long day at work, and I wanted to get home, but something made me stop and ask if he needed help. The man looked up and smiled with a little surprise. He introduced himself as Ryan Mitchell and explained that he was traveling through the area when his car started acting differently. He was not sure what the problem was, and he had been trying to figure it out before deciding what to do next. I told him I knew a little about cars and offered to take a look. It was a small thing, nothing dramatic, nothing that seemed important at the time. I simply checked a few things, gave him some advice, and helped him understand what steps he could take. While we waited, we started talking. At first, it was just casual conversation between two strangers who happened to meet at a gas station. But after a few minutes, I realized Ryan was someone who had a thoughtful way of seeing the world. He told me he was a freelance photographer and that he often traveled because he enjoyed capturing stories through pictures. I told him about my work repairing vehicles and how I liked solving problems, even when most people never noticed the effort behind it. We laughed about how different our jobs were, but how both required paying attention to details. Eventually, everything with his car seemed manageable, and the moment came when we had to go our separate ways. Ryan thanked me more than once and told me he appreciated that a complete stranger had taken the time to help him. I simply smiled and said it was nothing. To me, it was just a normal act of kindness. I drove home that evening without thinking much about it. I did not know Ryan's name would stay in my memory. I did not know that a person I met for only a few minutes would appear in my life again. I did not know that one small decision to stop and help someone would lead to a connection I never expected. For the next few days, I found myself thinking about that evening at the gas station more than I expected. Not because something extraordinary happened, but because there was something memorable about a simple conversation with someone I had never met before. Usually, my days moved quickly. I focused on work, handled responsibilities, and followed the same routine without questioning it. But meeting Ryan reminded me that every person we pass has a story we know nothing about. I wondered where he was going, what moments had shaped him, and whether he ever thought about that short conversation after we left. Of course, I assumed he probably moved on like most people would. After all, we were strangers. A few minutes of helping someone with a car issue did not usually become something important. Life continued as normal. I returned to my regular schedule, spending my mornings at the repair shop and my evenings at home. Still, I noticed something had changed. I became more aware of the people around me. I started having small conversations with customers instead of only focusing on the work in front of me. I realized that a simple interaction could make an ordinary day feel different. About 2 weeks later, I stopped by a small local coffee shop before work. It was a place I visited occasionally when I wanted a quiet morning. I ordered my usual drink and stood near the window while waiting. As I looked outside, I noticed someone walking by who seemed familiar. At first, I thought my mind was simply connecting random memories. Then the person turned around, and I recognized him. It was Ryan. For a moment, we both looked surprised. The chances of meeting someone again after a brief encounter at a gas station felt almost impossible. Ryan smiled and walked over, saying my name as if he could not believe it either. I laughed and told him I was surprised to see him too. He explained that he had been visiting the area again for a photography project and happened to stop at the same coffee shop before starting his day. We talked about how unexpected the moment was. Ryan told me that he had remembered our conversation because it was rare for someone to stop and help without expecting anything in return. I told him that I did not think much about it at the time. I was just doing what I hoped someone would do for me if I needed help. But hearing that it had meant something to him made me realize that small actions can stay with people longer than we imagine. We sat together for a while and continued talking. This time, the conversation felt different. We were no longer two strangers meeting by chance. We were two people who had already shared a small but meaningful moment. Ryan told me more about his photography, the places he had visited, and the stories behind some of his favorite pictures. I shared more about my work and the quiet life I had built for myself. The more we talked, the more I realized how much we had in common despite coming from completely different worlds. When we finally left the coffee shop, we exchanged contact information. Neither of us knew where that connection would lead. But as I walked back to my car, I had a feeling that our second meeting was not just a coincidence. Sometimes the people who enter our lives unexpectedly are the ones who leave the strongest impressions. After meeting Ryan again, I expected our conversation to be nothing more than a pleasant coincidence. I thought we would exchange a few messages, maybe share a few stories, and eventually return to our separate lives. That was usually how things happened. People crossed paths, created a brief memory, and continued moving forward. But with Ryan, something felt different. There was an ease in the way we talked, like we had known each other longer than we actually had. Over the following weeks, we started keeping in touch. At first, our conversations were simple. We shared pictures of places we visited, talked about our work, and exchanged small updates about our days. But gradually, those conversations became something I looked forward to. I realized I was checking my phone more often, not because I was waiting for a specific message, but because I enjoyed hearing Ryan's perspective on things. He had a way of noticing details that most people overlooked. As a photographer, he saw meaning in ordinary moments. A quiet street in the morning, a person smiling while waiting for coffee, a small corner of a city that most people passed without noticing. Listening to him talk about those things made me look at my own life differently. I started realizing that maybe I had been moving through my days too quickly. I had spent so much time focusing on responsibilities that I forgot to appreciate simple experiences. One weekend, Ryan invited me to visit a local art market where he was taking photographs for a personal project. I almost said no, not because I did not want to go, but because stepping away from my usual routine was something I rarely did. I had become comfortable with predictable plans. But I remembered something Ryan had said during one of our conversations. Sometimes the moments we avoid are the ones that become the memories we value most. So I decided to go. Spending the afternoon with Ryan felt surprisingly natural. We walked through the market, talked with local artists, and stopped at small places that caught his attention. I watched how carefully he observed everything around him. He was not just taking pictures. He was collecting stories. At one point, Ryan showed me a photograph he had taken earlier that day. It was a simple image of an older couple sitting together outside a small shop, sharing a quiet moment. He explained that he liked capturing moments that showed connection because those were the memories people often treasured the most. That stayed with me. I realized Ryan did not just look at the world differently. He reminded others to look at it differently too. As we continued walking, our conversation became more personal. Ryan asked about my life, my goals, and what I wanted for the future. I answered honestly, which was unusual for me. I told him that I had spent years building a stable life, but sometimes I wondered if I had become too comfortable. Ryan did not judge me or try to give advice. He simply listened. That was one of the things I appreciated most about him. He made conversations feel safe. By the end of the day, I understood that Ryan was no longer just the stranger I helped at a gas station. He had become someone whose presence made my life feel a little more open and meaningful. I still did not know where this connection would lead, but for the first time in a long while, I was excited about what could happen next. The more time I spent with Ryan, the more I realized that our connection had grown beyond the unusual way we first met. What started as a simple moment at a gas station had slowly become a friendship that brought something new into my everyday life. Before Ryan, I had always believed that meaningful relationships needed years to develop. I thought people became important only after sharing a long history together. But Ryan showed me that sometimes the right person can enter your life at the most unexpected moment and still leave a lasting impression. One evening, Ryan invited me to join him at a small community photography event where he was displaying some of his recent work. I agreed, even though events like that were outside my usual comfort zone. I was used to spending my free time quietly, either working on personal projects or relaxing at home. Walking into a room filled with creative people, conversations, and unfamiliar faces felt different from the life I normally lived. But having Ryan there made everything easier. He introduced me to people he knew, shared stories about his photographs, and made sure I never felt out of place. As I watched him interact with others, I noticed something I had not fully understood before. Ryan had a way of making people feel comfortable. He listened carefully, remembered small details, and treated every conversation like it mattered. It reminded me of the same kindness he had shown me when we first met. Later that night, after the event ended, we walked through the city streets and talked about how different our lives had been before we met. Ryan told me that he often traveled because he was searching for moments that felt meaningful. He said that sometimes the smallest encounters became the memories people carried with them the longest. I smiled because I realized that our first meeting was exactly that kind of moment. I told him that before meeting him, I had become used to doing everything on my own. My routine was comfortable, but I had not realized how much I had limited myself. Ryan listened quietly and said that everyone needed moments that reminded them they were part of something bigger. His words stayed with me because they felt true. Over time, I started noticing changes in myself. I became more willing to accept invitations, try new experiences, and talk about things I usually kept private. Ryan never pushed me to change. He simply created a space where I felt comfortable being more open. That was what made our connection special. It was not about one person fixing another person's life. It was about two people bringing out qualities that had always been there. A few days later, we met for coffee and continued our usual conversations. But this time, I noticed something different. The friendship that had started from a random encounter felt more meaningful with every conversation. I found myself wondering about Ryan's life when I was not around. I wanted to know more about his dreams, his challenges, and the experiences that shaped him. At the same time, I noticed Ryan becoming more curious about my world too. We were no longer just sharing stories. We were becoming part of each other's stories. Still remembered the first moment I saw him at the gas station. Back then, he was simply someone who needed a little help. Now, he was someone whose presence had changed the way I viewed connection, kindness, and the unexpected paths life could take. As the weeks passed, I began to realize that Ryan had become part of my everyday thoughts in a way I never expected. It was not something that happened all at once. There was no single moment when everything suddenly changed. Instead, it happened through countless small conversations, shared experiences, and the feeling of knowing there was someone who genuinely cared about how my day was going. Before meeting Ryan, I had always considered myself independent. I believed that relying on myself was the safest way to live. I had built a comfortable routine around work, personal projects, and quiet evenings at home. But Ryan showed me that independence did not mean shutting people out. Sometimes allowing someone to become part of your life could make everything feel more meaningful. One Saturday morning, Ryan invited me to join him on a photography walk through a historic neighborhood nearby. He wanted to capture old buildings, local businesses, and the small details that made the area unique. I agreed immediately, which surprised even me. A few months earlier, I probably would have found a reason to stay home. But now I was starting to enjoy experiences I would have normally avoided. Walking through the neighborhood with Ryan felt natural. He noticed things I would have passed without a second thought. A colorful sign outside a small bookstore, a family-owned restaurant that had been open for decades, the way sunlight reflected through the windows of an old building. He reminded me that every place had a story if someone was willing to pay attention. While we walked, We talked about our childhood memories, the choices that shaped us, and the dreams we still wanted to accomplish. Ryan told me that becoming a photographer was not always an easy path. Many people had questioned whether it was practical, but he continued because he loved capturing moments that mattered. I admired that about him. He followed something meaningful even when it required patience and uncertainty. In return, I told him about my work as an automotive technician and how I enjoyed solving problems because every vehicle had a different story behind it. Ryan smiled and said that maybe our jobs were not as different as they seemed. He said that both of us were looking closely at things others often ignored. That simple observation stayed with me because it felt true. The more I learned about Ryan, the more I understood why our first meeting had stayed in my mind. He was someone who paid attention. He noticed details, listened carefully, and made people feel valued. Those were qualities I appreciated because they were the same reasons I had stopped to help him in the first place. But I also started noticing something about myself. I was becoming someone who paid attention too. I was more present during conversations. I was more willing to share my thoughts. I was no longer just moving through life following the same routine. One evening, while we were sitting at a small cafe, Ryan asked me a question that caught me off guard. He asked when the last time was that I had done something completely unexpected just because it made me happy. I thought about it for a moment and realized I did not have an answer. That realization was surprising. I had spent so much time focusing on being responsible that I had forgotten the importance of enjoying life. Ryan did not tell me how to change or what decisions to make. He simply asked a question that made me think. And that was one of the reasons I valued having him in my life. He did not try to become someone who saved me. He was simply someone who reminded me that there was more to life than the routines I had created. Looking back, I understood that the stranger I helped at the gas station had quietly helped me too. Not by solving my problems, but by showing me a different way to experience the world. After everything that had happened with Ryan, I started to understand that the most meaningful changes in life often happen quietly. There was no single dramatic moment that transformed everything. Instead, my perspective slowly changed through conversations, shared experiences, and the simple feeling of having someone who truly understood me. Ryan had become someone I looked forward to talking with, but more importantly, he had become someone who encouraged me to see parts of myself that I had ignored for years. One afternoon, we sat outside a small cafe after walking around the city. Ryan was editing some photographs on his camera, and I was watching people pass by while enjoying my coffee. It was a peaceful moment, but something about it made me think about how different my life felt compared to a few months earlier. Before meeting Ryan, I rarely stopped to appreciate moments like that. I was always focused on the next task, the next responsibility, or the next thing I needed to accomplish. Ryan noticed that I was quieter than usual and asked what I was thinking about. I told him that I was surprised by how much my life had changed because of one random encounter. I explained that when I helped him at the gas station, I never expected anything in return. I just saw someone who needed assistance and decided to help. But somehow, that small choice introduced me to someone who changed the way I looked at connection and relationships. Ryan smiled and told me something I would remember for a long time. He said that sometimes people enter our lives at exactly the right moment, even when neither person realizes it at first. His words made me think about my own journey. I had spent years believing that my life was complete because I had work, a home, and a comfortable routine. But I had not realized that something was missing until Ryan showed me what genuine connection felt like. Later that week, Ryan shared something personal with me. He explained that before we met, he had been feeling uncertain about his direction in life. Traveling and photography had always been important to him, but he sometimes wondered whether he was making the right choices. He told me that our conversation at the gas station reminded him that small moments of kindness still existed everywhere. Hearing that surprised me because I never thought my actions had such an impact. I had simply helped someone because it felt like the right thing to do. But Ryan reminded me that even ordinary kindness can become meaningful to another person. That conversation helped me understand something important. A connection is not created because two people are perfect or because they have identical lives. It is created because two people are willing to listen, understand, and appreciate each other. Ryan and I were different in many ways. He saw the world through photographs and stories, while I saw it through repairs and solutions. But those differences were exactly what made our conversations interesting. Over time, I became more comfortable sharing my thoughts with him. I started talking about dreams I had never mentioned to anyone else and concerns I usually kept to myself. Ryan did the same. We were no longer two strangers who happened to meet by chance. We were two people who had built trust through honesty and patience. When I looked back at the evening at the gas station, I realized that I had not just helped someone with a car problem. I had opened the door to a connection I never expected. And sometimes, the moments that seem the smallest in the beginning become the ones that shape our lives the most. As my friendship with Ryan continued to grow, I began noticing how much our connection had changed the way I approached life. The person I met at the gas station was no longer just a stranger with a car problem. He had become someone I trusted, someone I could talk to about things I usually kept to myself, and someone who reminded me that life was not meant to be experienced only through routines and responsibilities. What surprised me most was how naturally everything happened. There was never pressure to force a friendship or create moments that did not feel real. We simply enjoyed spending time together and learning more about each other. One weekend, Ryan invited me to join him on a short trip to a nearby small town where he wanted to photograph some local scenery. Normally, I would have hesitated. Taking an entire day away from my usual schedule was not something I often did. But I found myself saying yes before I could overthink it. That decision alone showed me how much I had changed. A few months earlier, I would have chosen the familiar option every time. Now, I was beginning to understand the value of new experiences. During the drive, Ryan and I talked about everything from childhood memories to future goals. He asked questions that made me think more deeply about my own choices. I told him that I had always focused on building a stable life because stability felt safe. Ryan understood that feeling because he had his own reasons for chasing a different path. He explained that photography allowed him to capture moments people often forgot to appreciate. For him, every picture represented a story, a feeling, or a memory that deserved to be remembered. When we arrived at the small town, we spent the afternoon walking through quiet streets, visiting local shops, and taking in the atmosphere. Ryan photographed old buildings, colorful signs, and simple moments between people. Watching him work reminded me why I enjoyed being around him. He was present in a way that many people were not. He was not rushing toward the next thing. He was fully experiencing where he was. At one point, Ryan asked if he could take a picture of me. I laughed because I was not used to being the person in front of the camera. I usually preferred staying behind the scenes, focusing on my work and avoiding attention. But Ryan told me that everyone deserved to have moments captured, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. That idea stayed with me. I realized I had spent a lot of time waiting until life felt perfect before allowing myself to enjoy it. Ryan helped me see that ordinary moments were already valuable. Later that evening, while we were sitting at a small restaurant, our conversation became more personal. Ryan told me about some of the challenges he had faced while building his career. He admitted that there were times when he questioned whether he was making the right choices. I was surprised because he always seemed confident and certain. It reminded me that everyone carries thoughts and worries that others may never see. I shared some of my own doubts too. I told him that sometimes I wondered if I had chosen comfort over happiness. Ryan listened carefully and said that recognizing what we want is often the first step toward creating a different future. That conversation meant a lot to me because it was not about finding perfect answers. It was about knowing there was someone willing to listen. By the end of the day, I realized something important. Ryan had entered my life as a stranger, but he had become someone who encouraged me to become more open, more curious, and more willing to experience the world around me. The small decision to stop at that gas station had created a connection I never could have predicted. And now, I was starting to wonder how much more my life could change because of it. As time passed, I started to realize that my connection with Ryan had become one of the most meaningful parts of my life. What began as a simple act of kindness at a gas station had slowly turned into a friendship built on trust, honesty, and countless conversations. But as much as I appreciated having Ryan in my life, I also started facing a feeling I had not expected. I wondered what would happen if this connection changed. I had become so comfortable sharing my thoughts with him that the idea of losing that closeness felt difficult to imagine. One evening, Ryan and I met at the same coffee shop where we had first talked after seeing each other again. It had become one of our favorite places to spend time together. We sat near the window, watching people walk through the city while talking about our plans for the future. Ryan told me about a possible photography opportunity that would require him to spend more time traveling. I immediately felt happy for him because I knew how important his work was. But at the same time, I felt a quiet worry that I did not want to admit. I wondered if more distance would change the connection we had built. Ryan noticed that I became quieter and asked if something was on my mind. At first, I considered saying everything was fine. That was what I usually did. I was used to keeping my concerns to myself and handling things privately. But one of the things Ryan had taught me was that real connections required honesty. So I told him the truth. I explained that I was excited for him, but I was also worried that things would feel different if his life became busier. Ryan listened carefully, just like he always did. He told me that he understood because he had similar fears. He explained that sometimes people avoid meaningful connections because they are afraid of what could happen if circumstances change. His words made me think about how often I had avoided taking chances simply because I wanted to protect myself from disappointment. Ryan reminded me that a connection was not valuable because it was guaranteed to stay exactly the same forever. It was valuable because two people chose to appreciate it while they had it. That conversation changed the way I viewed our relationship. I realized I had been focusing too much on the possibility of losing something instead of appreciating what already existed. Ryan was not someone who entered my life to complete something missing. He was someone who encouraged me to become more open and confident in who I already was. After that evening, I felt more comfortable expressing my thoughts instead of hiding them. Ryan and I continued spending time together, but there was a new level of understanding between us. We talked more openly about our hopes, our worries, and the things we wanted from the future. I learned that trust was not created by avoiding difficult conversations. It was created by having them and knowing the other person would still be there afterward. Looking back, I realized that the biggest change in me was not simply meeting Ryan. It was learning that unexpected connections could be worth the risk. The stranger I helped on an ordinary evening had shown me that life could become richer when I allowed myself to step outside my comfort zone. And as I watched Ryan continue following his dreams, I knew that whatever happened next, meeting him had already changed my life in ways I never expected. When I think back to the evening I first saw Ryan at the gas station, I still find it amazing how a simple decision could create such a meaningful change in my life. At that moment, I had no idea who he was or what our conversation would become. I only knew that someone needed a little help, and I had the chance to offer it. What seemed like an ordinary moment became the beginning of a connection that taught me more about kindness, trust, and being open to unexpected possibilities. Before meeting Ryan, I believed life was mostly about maintaining control. I liked knowing what my days would look like. I liked having a routine and avoiding situations that felt uncertain. There was comfort in staying within familiar boundaries. But I eventually realized that comfort and fulfillment were not always the same thing. Sometimes the moments that surprise us are the ones that help us grow the most. Ryan reminded me of that every day. He showed me that there was value in slowing down, noticing small details, and allowing people to become part of my story. Through our conversations, I learned that everyone carries experiences, dreams, and challenges that are invisible from the outside. The person standing next to us in a store, sitting across from us at a coffee shop, or passing by on the street may have a story we know nothing about. Ryan was once that person to me, just another stranger having a difficult day at a gas station. Now, he was someone who had become an important part of my life. Over time, I also understood that our connection was not built on one perfect moment. It was created through many small choices, choosing to listen, choosing to be honest, choosing to make time for another person. Those choices turned a random encounter into a friendship that changed the way I viewed relationships. When Ryan continued traveling for his photography projects, we stayed connected. We shared updates about our lives, celebrated achievements, and supported each other through challenges. The distance did not erase the connection we had built because it was never based only on being physically close. It was based on understanding and trust. I often thought about how different my life might have been if I had decided to keep walking that day at the gas station. If I had been too busy, too tired, or too focused on my own plans, I would have missed meeting someone who changed my perspective completely. That thought reminded me that kindness is never wasted. We may never know the full impact of a small action, but that does not make it any less important. Looking back, I no longer see that evening as a random event. I see it as a reminder that life can introduce us to incredible people when we least expect it. Sometimes the connections that matter most begin in ordinary places and ordinary moments. A simple conversation can become a lasting memory. A stranger can become someone you trust. A small act of kindness can open the door to a completely new chapter. Ryan entered my life as someone I helped for only a few minutes. But in the end, he became someone who helped me see the world differently. And that was the unexpected gift I never knew I needed.